This is the Cannabis Oversight Commission, and I'm going to ask Lindley to call the roll.
Senator McDougall. Senator McPike.
Here.
Senator McClellan. Here. Delegate Adams.
Here.
Delegate Campbell. Delegate Freitas. Delegate Ranson.
Here.
Delegate Leftwich.
Here.
Delegate Herring.
Here.
Senator Eben.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Why don't we just start by having everyone just introduce themselves for anyone in the audience who might not be familiar with all the members. Delegate Leftwich, do you want to say who you are and where you're from?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Jay Leftwich, I represent the 78th, which is wholly comprised within the city of Chesapeake, and I look forward to the presentation today and serving on this committee.
Good morning. My name is Dawn Adams. I represent the 68th District, which is Richmond, Northern Chesterfield, and Henrico. And I look forward to continuing to serve on this commission. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Delegate Ranson. I represent the 99th District in rural Virginia, also known as the Northern Neck, 6 counties, Caroline County, King George, Westmoreland, Lancaster, Northumberland, and Richmond County. And looking forward to learning more.
Great. Did you bring us oysters today?
No oysters
Okay.
today, but there are plenty out there.
Okay, thank you. Adam Eben from State Senate, Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax, and happy to be here.
Charnel Herring. I represent the city of Alexandria, and it's the 46th House District.
Good morning. I'm Jeremy McPike, Senator from the 29th District, which is parts of Prince William, Manassas, and Manassas Park.
Good morning. Jennifer McClellan, the 9th District, which is parts of the city of Richmond, including the capital, Henrico County, Charles City County, and the town of Ashland.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to our new members and to our returning members. We are looking forward to a number of presentations this morning. And I want to be clear that my goal, and I hope all our goal for this commission, is to build towards consensus in legislation that would establish a safe, well-regulated adult use marketplace for cannabis in Virginia. And I'd like to begin by having our staff attorney, Mr. David May, give us an update on our past legislative action this past session on cannabis regulation and a brief summary of the work before us.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, yeah, I've been asked to get up and kind of let you know where we are legislatively on the topic of marijuana right now. Just looking back a little bit, in 2020, that was the decrim year. That's when we transitioned the penalty for simple possession from a misdemeanor to a $25 civil penalty. And then in 2021, we legalized marijuana. So during the 2021 session, the General Assembly passed House Bill 2312 and Senate Bill 1406. As you'll recall, these bills, which were identical, contain a partial reenactment. So some of the provisions became law. Majority of the provisions did not become law because they, being subject to reenactment, they would have had to have been passed again by the 2022 General Assembly. Obviously, that did not happen. So I'm going to run through some of the key items that were not subject to reenactment and therefore became law. Number one, obviously, is that we legalized possession of up to an ounce of marijuana by persons 21 years of age and older. We allow persons to cultivate up to 4 plants at their home for personal use. We allow adults to share marijuana with other adults in an amount up to 1 ounce. We enacted several other ancillary criminal provisions, including provisions related to underage possession, open container, and public consumption. We mostly created the Cannabis Control Authority. They are established. We have some provisions remaining that need to be filled in to fully put them in place. The Cannabis Control Authority consists of the Board of Directors, Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council, Chief Executive Officer, and the agents and employees of the CCA. In the 2021 legislation, we also created the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board and Fund, the Cannabis Equity Business Loan Program and Fund, and the Cannabis Oversight Commission. So now looking at some of the provisions that were subject to reenactment and thus did not become law. Among those were sections that basically created a general framework for a retail marijuana market in the Commonwealth, including provisions related to licensing, cultivation, processing, transportation, testing, and labeling. Under these provisions, the CCA was set to begin issuing licenses on July 1st, 2023, with retail sales to start January 1st, 2024. Again, that is not where we're at right now. That was just the plan prior. So accordingly, we're kind of in a situation now where while we have legalized possession of marijuana, you just can't lawfully purchase it in the Commonwealth. Another topic that I was asked to quickly address today is medical marijuana. In 2021, with the goal of shifting the medical marijuana program from the Board of Pharmacy to the CCA to have basically most things related to marijuana in one place, there was an enactment clause that said by July 1st, 2023, all of the regulations of the Board of Pharmacy related to medical marijuana were supposed to shift over to the CCA. However, that was basically the only thing in the bill about that. So what we have now is a situation where the General Assembly ultimately needs to make a decision on whether we want to continue with that transfer of medical marijuana to the CCA, or if we want to keep it with the Board of Pharmacy. But either way, there's something that we need to do legislatively. If the plan is to continue with the transfer, there are a lot of provisions in the Drug Control Act that we need to move over to Subtitle 2 of Title 4.1 to get them underneath the CCA. Everything from regulations and statutory provisions governing their facilities to how they distribute, transportation, labeling, everything. We would need to shift that over. If the decision is to keep medical marijuana with the Board of Pharmacy, we would instead need to go back and repeal that prior enactment so that the regulations will stay with the Board of Pharmacy. Because right now we have a situation where basically the law statutorily did not transfer to the CCA, but the regulations are set to transfer. That's basically all I have. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'll start with the issues with the Board of Pharmacy. What's the time frame on that, on when the transfer, can you repeat that?
Yeah, the regulations were set to transfer July 1st of 2023. So we'll have one more session in between. This would be our last chance.
And what would happen if no action was taken? Would be in conflict?
Well, the bill that passed, the provision that was not subject to reenactment, says that the regulations have to transfer by July 1st, 2023. So I'm not sure how that would play out. I have not seen that happen before. But you have one law saying the regulations have to transfer. So if they did in fact transfer it, I mean, the Code of Virginia says the Board of Pharmacy is doing all of these things, and then the CCA would be somehow administering the regulations. I don't think that that's a scenario that could work.
Okay. Are there members of the committee with questions, additional questions? Mr. May? Senator McPike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question for Mr. May. There are also follow-up actions included in the budget. Can you indicate what that has, the impacts to like home possession or other things in terms of, is there a limit of quantity or is it limitless? Can you have 100 pounds at home?
As far as I understand it, at home, we do not have a limit. There was some confusion in the language as to, you know, where you could have up to 1 ounce, which obviously you are allowed to have in a public place and on your person. So we had some discrepancies about how much you could have at your home. I believe the way that the law stands now with the budget language, they're working on updating the portal right now. But that limitation was made clear that it would not apply for people who had marijuana at their home, you know, that they were growing for personal use.
Senator McPike?
Just, I guess, a follow-up. I mean, theoretically, say it's not feasible to grow 100 pounds off of your 4 plants. Is there any nexus between the actual home grow and the language that's in the budget?
Can you clarify?
In other words, just to follow up on the last statement, is there any connection at all between whether it's grown at home and what's possessed at home? Separate from a plant labeling, if you have a harvest of something in your home,
that is there a limitation on how much you can hoard basically in your house? I don't believe there is.
Okay, thank you.
That's all right.
Delegate
Delegate hearing.
Delegate Herring.
Thank you, Senator, or Mr. Chair. Just want to go back to the issue of the transfer. And I'm not clear because I just thought they're just fundamentally basic agency law that are you saying that we definitely need to change the law to match the regulations? Because I thought the regulations would not really be valid without the statutory authority to do that.
So, yeah, I mean, and you're correct. Most of the time it's not the statutory authority for the regulations to transfer would be the 2021 legislation. So there is the authority for that to transfer. The big problem is just that if you look at the Drug Control Act, that's where you're going to find all of your rules about our medical marijuana program. Everything from, how the licenses were divvied out to how they operate on a daily basis. All of that would need to apply to the CCA if they were to be managing this program. So it's just a situation where we just need to, if we want to continue with the transfer, we just have a few more things in the code to clean up to make that happen.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up.
Delegate Herring.
So that section that was passed in 2021, that was not subject to reenactment?
It was not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we've got a question from Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, again, about this transfer, can it not be something as uncomplicated as supplanting a subsection of a department over into the Cannabis Control Agency so that there is a subsection that is Board of Pharmacy and sort of their own little team, but it's under that authority?
Yeah, I mean, we could do it a variety of ways. I think if the goal is to leave it with the Board of Pharmacy, I think it's a lot easier statutorily because we just leave everything in place and we just get rid of this reenactment, of this enactment clause that we had. But if we do want the transfer to happen to the CCA, basically what we would do is just cut that whole chapter out or article out of the Drug Control Act, move it over to Title 4.1 and replace, all the references to the Board of Pharmacy with the Cannabis Control Authority. And we may have to tighten up a couple other things to make sure they have the authority to, administer that medical program, but that's the majority of what we'd have to do.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Adams.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, there's a value in having one authority that's controlling an entire conceptual framework, right? And then similarly, there are all kinds of systems where there are multiple departments. Take a hospital, for example, where you have unique situations. So is it that difficult, though, to imagine that there's a medical department within the agency that is the Cannabis Authority?
No, I don't think so. The Cannabis Control Authority and the Board of Pharmacy have been in communication about this issue. I think that's essentially what it would look like if we do the transfer. The medical program would continue to exist and it would kind of just be a subset with a specialty. One of the advantages of having both of them, retail market and medical, in the same place is that the CCA would be in a better position to align some of the regulations governing them. So I think it could get pretty complicated if a pharmaceutical processor is doing recreational sales and medical sales, and on one side of the store they're having to comply with these rules, and on the other comply with a different set.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, were there any other questions for Mr. May? Okay, thank you, David. We also have a guest, I believe via Zoom, from the National Conference of State Legislatures, Carmen Hansen, who's a senior fellow in the health program. And Carmen is going to give us an update on the national trends of state-level cannabis regulation. Lindley is, okay, she zoomed in, okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting us to be here today. I'm Carmen Hansen, as you said, a senior fellow in the health program at the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I was asked to present an overview of state-regulated non-medical adult use cannabis programs and social and health equity policies in states with those regulated cannabis programs. And just as a disclaimer, as a bipartisan organization, NCSL takes no position on this or any other state policy decisions. For those of you who may not be familiar with NCSL, we're the country's most trusted bipartisan organization serving the state legislators and legislative staff for more than 40 years. We represent the nation's state legislators and legislative staff, which includes 7,383 state legislators and over 25,000 legislative staff. We promote policy innovation, create opportunities for lawmakers to share knowledge, and ensure state legislatures have a strong, cohesive voice in the federal system. We do this because we believe in the importance of the legislative institution and know that when the states are strong, our nation is strong. Our services include research, where we track more than 1,400 issues and personalized research services for legislators and staff. Again, we take no position on anything that we are studying. We simply just track what states are doing. We bring legislators and staff from across the political spectrums together to share ideas and solutions. And we provide trainings that are specifically tailored for legislators and legislative staff. And we also advocate on behalf of the states on Capitol Hill, fighting against preemption and for the 10th Amendment and maintaining federalism. And we have meetings. We have tons of meetings. I hope some of you were able to come out to Denver for our legislative summit about a month ago. We hope you had a great time and that you took a lot away home for the folks of Virginia. So NCSL has a vast experience researching complicated issues such as state cannabis regulations, and that helps us help you, state legislators and staff, with your questions. And I've been tracking these state cannabis policies for over 17 years, back when there were fewer than 10 states that had medical programs. So I've kind of seen it from point A to point B, and being headquartered in Denver, Colorado, I've seen everything that Colorado has done literally from a front row seat. So I'm going to start off with a brief general overview of state regulated medical medical and some of the adult use, plus some of that includes the medical side, and dig deeper into some areas where programs differ on topics like licensing fees and requirements, purchasing limits, home cultivation allowances, examples of local control, and then those social equity programs. So I'll do my best to keep things moving along. So this quilt-looking map represents the current landscape of regulated cannabis programs across the states and territories. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that while states may regulate cannabis, that this is federally illegal. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration labels cannabis with over 0.3% THC as a Schedule I substance, meaning that it's believed to have no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse by a federal agency. But setting that aside, as of this month, 37 states, DC, and 4 territories regulate a comprehensive medical cannabis program, which means that they offer multiple types of products containing a variety of THC content to qualified patients. And those states are indicated by the 2 shades of green on this map. And of those 37 medical states, 19 states, DC and Guam, and those are marked in the darkest green, regulate cannabis or allow small amounts of non-medical adult use, often referred to as recreational use. These numbers have changed rapidly in recent years as voters in initiative and referenda states have increased, and increasingly state legislatures enact legislation. Legislatures enacted about half of the non-medical adult use programs through legislation, and the other half were approved by voters. Although legislatures and voters have enacted non-medical adult use cannabis measures, the legislature still plays an important role in these programs, as you are experiencing right now. Legislators are drafting, enacting legislation, regulations, or enabling language in response to these ballot initiatives to create rules and regulations, establish fees, taxes, oversight and enforcement, and other policy areas, including evaluation and local control. Here are some details for adult use regulation and oversight agencies. And these are just an example of the 19 that are out there. For states that regulate both, and this gets to a little bit of what you were just discussing, it is common for oversight for both programs to move under one agency. However, the departments of health generally will still manage the medical registries and applications. The other oversight agency will handle all of the licensing and all of the production and all those other licenses, with the exception of who has a medical card to participate in the programs. So for example, Colorado uses the Marijuana Enforcement Division within the Department of Revenue, and our medical program is still run by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Maine uses the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. Nevada uses their Department of Taxation, and newer states have a lot of variation compared to some of the earlier states. And as a reminder, this is the state level of oversight and regulation, and many states allow localities to further regulate or oversee businesses or prohibit locations and operations of cannabis-based businesses within their limits. In those situations, the state is usually creating an initial floor of regulation and not always a ceiling. A few states do limit the types of regulations a locality may impose. For example, they aren't able to completely opt out, or they can't make so many restrictions or rules that it becomes impossible for a business to operate. So, for example, they can't say you can't have a dispensary within 10 miles of another one. And if your city's only 2 miles across, that just doesn't work with the math. So when it comes to licensing states, most states do not limit the number of non-medical adult use business licenses at the state level. They allow local control for those folks to opt in or opt out, otherwise limit locations or other qualifications for licensure. A few exceptions to that include Michigan, and their state act forbids a state limit. And in Oregon, the localities may deny a license based on supply and demand, or if a locality hasn't requested, there be more businesses in their area. And then Arizona caps dispensaries to 1 for every 10 pharmacies. A few more examples. Illinois issues licenses in phases with no limits on transporters and a max of 500 retailers. Maine limits their licenses by a total plant canopy in the state at 800,000 square feet. And Nevada limits their retail store licenses by county population. And it's kind of a complicated calculation, but if you need more information, I can share that with you. Here's just a table. It's kind of complicated, but there's just a lot of information on it. And this is just a sampling of some of the adult use states. And this information was accurate as of earlier this year. Something could have changed. Things change fast and furious in this area. But you'll see for the first column, P is the possession limit. C is the home cultivation limit, meaning the number of plants or sometimes the amount that they can keep at home if it is described in the statute. And the dollar sign is the individual sale limit per transaction. And possession and purchase limits are typically around 1 to 2 ounces of flower product and a varying amount of other products, concentrates, edibles, things like that. They're typically capped at either a percentage of total quantity of THC or total quantity of THC or a number of packages, because those packages probably have a maximum, like edibles, of 100 milligrams or something like that. And I can say from Colorado's experience, the testing and tracking issues have gotten much more specific since the industry started. And now all products in Colorado are tested and tracked as they are in most states. We've seen more local limits on licenses, the types of licenses required, and licensing procedures. Here's another example of, these are some of the more recently approved states and their data as of earlier this year. And again, something could have changed in the last couple weeks since I updated this, but the differences in the newer states compared to some of the original states is that some of the newer states allow for larger personal possessions, so for say at home, and they include different purchase limits for concentrate products, and that's something that the original states didn't necessarily include at the start of their adult use sales. And these are some more examples of state cannabis licensing fees. And again, just a sample. States with both types of programs tend to have a slightly different rate for medical versus non-medical adult use licenses, and that's particularly in the area of cultivation licenses. Cultivator licenses, those fees can range from $1,000 to $20,000, depending on a few factors, like the type of system that they're using, or if it's vertically integrated or not, or if there is a limit on the number of licenses in the state. A dispensary application fee generally is in the range of $1,000 to $5,000, with registration or annual fees typically between $5,000 and $20,000. However, there are some that go as high as $100,000 in a few cases. And agencies may refund application fees to unsuccessful applicants or keep a portion of that. For example, Arizona will refund $1,000 of the $5,000 application fee if the applicant is not allocated a license. but they do not give a refund if the application is either withdrawn or otherwise unsuccessful. And again, the licensing structure also varies if the industry is vertically integrated or not. If not, those licenses tend to be higher because you're in the long run issuing fewer licenses because that one entity is doing everything from cultivation to retail sales. Most states directly fund cannabis oversight and enforcement with the revenue generated from application and licensing fees. Localities may also require licensure or additional fees, which are typically much lower than the state fees. Most states also license and register their industry employees at a cost of anywhere from $10 to $200 per year. And if you'd like more state examples on that, I'd be happy to put some together. Testing has become more and more an important part of the industry and regulatory process. Now, I am not a chemist or a pharmacist, but this information is borrowed from some testimony to an Oklahoma legislative hearing by Jeremy Applin, who has served as vice chairman of ASTM International Committee of Cannabis, formerly known as the American Society for Testing of Materials. And he has over a decade of experience with marijuana testing and lab accreditation and has consulted with dozens of states and internationally. So these are the things that products are tested for. They meet specifications for purity, consistency, and strength. And this helps customers and patients know what they are getting based on the package label. Testing also creates a pathway for investigations if there is a problem with product manufacturing facility or a lab. They have those barcodes or a RFID tag on them, so those can be tracked as part of the state's track and trace program from literally seed to sale. And rigorous testing may also aid in the process for improvements in regulation, oversight, and product manufacturing. And a few groups have set their own national and international standards for cannabis product testing, including those listed here. So more specifically, what is tested for? Again, they're testing for potency and product consistency, and that is usually required for the labeling in each state. Tests are also used to determine any biological contaminants and moisture content, which can lead to mold, which is something you definitely don't want in particularly a flower product that's being inhaled into the lungs. And they also test for pesticides, heavy metals, residual solvents, and contaminants and filth, which is an actual technical term for things you would not want to see even in yourself, ingesting in any form, or even in your pet's food, I can promise you. So some of the home cultivations that are allowed in the majority of non-medical adult use states, the number of plants really varies widely from under a handful to 12 or more mature plants or seedlings. And recently, states are trending to prohibit home grow unless there's an extenuating circumstance or if the person lives, say, more than 25 miles away from a dispensary and in a rural area. So in summary, these are the categories that states typically regulate, creating those floor level policies, including licensing fees and owner and employee requirements and testing requirements, those packaging and label requirements, and they may create those general parameters for locations and hours of operations. Advertising limits and requirements may be established, but those are largely under local control. And if not otherwise specified in the legislation or in the initiative, the amount of local control, including the ability to opt in or opt out. So here are some areas where localities are in more control if they want to opt in or opt out of the industry. Any local licensing fees or requirements or establishment issues. Maybe the state allows for social consumption facilities, but the localities are able to opt in or opt out of those types of facilities, but maybe they aren't able to opt out of cultivation or retail sales, that kind of a thing. They are able to enact a local tax and identify where that revenue will go. They can have advertising permissions or restrictions. They can, again, establish those social use establishments or delivery if allowed by the state, and a few other areas, but those are generally the big major ones. So moving beyond those large regulatory categories, states are establishing social and health equity policies. And just to kind of set the level set a bit on what folks mean by social equity, I've found this definition kind of used quite a bit, but it's intentionally making rules and regulations that increase access to all levels of the cannabis industry to people or communities historically, negatively, or disproportionately targeted by law enforcement for possessing, consuming, or selling cannabis. And states or localities may create their own equity programs with a variety of characteristics. Typically, they hold a target number or percentage of licenses for people from impacted communities. They may offer financial assistance, discounted fees, mentoring, or other tools aimed at access to the level playing field for those applicants. And sometimes expungement or previous minor cannabis offenses is included in a social equity plan, or that can be rolled into your larger initiative or legislation to enact adult use cannabis industry. Equity programs are more common in recently adopting states like Illinois, Michigan, or Massachusetts, but some of the original states like Colorado and Washington have recently started to adopt those efforts on state and local levels. And following these slides, I have over a dozen examples of social equity efforts from non-medical adult use states that I will give very brief overviews of. So health equity is also something intentionally included in policymaking and often a subset of social equity. And this example comes from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and their researchers established this public health framework for cannabis policymaking. And this is using the core functions of public health that they identified. And they have these opportunities, including addressing health issues through monitoring and investigation, developing policy through education and community partnerships, and providing assurance through enforcement, a competent workforce, and evaluation. So an example of applying a public health framework to cannabis policy decisions may include directing a local law enforcement agency to use data collection and improved monitoring to determine if cannabis impaired driving trends are changing in the state. Another example could be tracking health issues associated with cannabis use, such as overconsumption or product contamination. In states that have employed a variety of these methods to incorporate public health and cannabis regulatory systems, including involving their public health agencies, they often assign oversight of that to a committee or an agency with public health focused members, requiring data tracking, surveillance, reporting, and even more tracking. So here's another example for health equity. States use revenues generated from taxes or licensing fees to mitigate the outcomes of disproportionate enforcement of previous laws on communities and individuals. For example, incarceration may negatively affect income, access to healthcare, education, and other social determinants of health. They may create public education campaigns aimed at general and disproportionately affected populations about the use of cannabis. And they may require collection and surveillance of public health and safety related data for short and long-term use analysis. And again, they may fund substance use disorder treatment, prevention, education, healthcare, and improve social equity within the industry. And this example on the screen is from Washington State, and this was projected back in their 2017-2019 biennium, and it includes financing the youth risk behavior surveys, substance use disorder treatment. It funds the Washington State Institute for Public Policy to study the health costs and overall impacts of legalized cannabis, plus additional health-related investments. And the regulation of adult use cannabis comes back to Colorado and Washington, which were the first two states to pass those voter-led ballot initiatives to regulate adult use cannabis. And again, those states did not include social equity provisions in the initial ballot initiative for the industry to have social equity. They may have had expungement and record clearing things, but they didn't necessarily put it into the licensing processes. And only the early adopting states only recently added these considerations to their regulations, either at the state or local levels. In Colorado's case, legislators enacted legislation in recent years to create these accelerator licenses, which is kind of like an intense internship, if you want to think of it that way. And this allows cultivators or manufacturers to operate alongside someone who is learning the industry, one of the social equity applicants. The accelerator licensee can receive technical, compliance, and capital assistance from that host licensed business. The licensed business that hosts the accelerator, they may be eligible for reduced licensing fees. So that's the incentive for them to host a social equity applicant to learn the ropes of the industry. This legislation was enacted in 2020, and it created a social equity licensee that requires residency, 51% ownership in the business, and a personal or family member connection to a cannabis arrest or conviction. Washington also did not include equity in the beginning, but they recently created a statewide social equity program. Their equity license has similar qualifications to Colorado, including residency and a personal or family member convicted under previous laws. They must own 51% of the business or more, and defies disproportionately impacted areas and a process for record expungement or clemency. Moving either farther northwest, we have Alaska, and they did not include anything about social equity in their original initiative. There's nothing in there about sealing records, and there was little discussion about social equity. Again, you're talking about Alaska, the population's pretty small. The industry is very located in the urban areas. So there just isn't a lot of the industry can only get so big in Alaska, so to speak. Oregon did not initially have an equity program either. However, early in 2020, they added a social equity subcommittee to the Oregon Cannabis Commission to study social equity issues. And they developed recommendations that they called their SEED report, which is their social equity and economic development. Oregon's licensing fees are comparatively lower than other states to encourage small business development from historically impacted areas. Staying out west, roughly a third of California's cities and counties allow for cannabis businesses. California's current social equity efforts are primarily done at the local level in the largest communities, but they vary widely in qualifications, assistance, and the types of benefits that they offer. However, if the locality receives state funds that are available to support their equity programs, they must submit a yearly report that includes how they identified the applicants and their licensees and how they qualified them. Maine did not include social equity in their initial measures. And in Nevada, they were not included, but the industry and the metro area are discussing ways to designate revenue to fund social equity efforts, like providing services for unhoused individuals, youth and health programs, among other efforts. Moving to the east, we have Massachusetts. And I'll describe 2016 as kind of the tipping point where states intentionally started to include equity considerations based on what happened in states like Colorado and Washington after a few years of industry experience in those states. In Massachusetts, their program includes upper income limits, residency requirements. A majority of employees or the owners of the business have drug-related convictions, and where the majority ownership of that business is of Black or of Latin descent. A unique aspect of the program is allowing for 2 years of exclusive access to social consumption and transportation licenses. And equity businesses have cited the high level of local control in Massachusetts and many localities just prohibiting cannabis businesses. And being a smaller state, they've really struggled to qualify for both state and local licenses. So again, Massachusetts, the geography has a lot of influence on the overall industry there. Turning to 2018, Michigan and Vermont joined in, and Michigan enacted equity measures requiring residency, a previous conviction, and being from or starting a business in an impacted community or a low-income area. The regulatory agency is tasked with developing a plan to promote and encourage mentorship and entrepreneurship, and they offer largely discounted application and licensing fees. And they recently expanded their definition of disproportionately impacted communities to quadruple the number of qualified areas. And so far, the state had reported low participation in the program because of the low number of qualified licensees. But because they expanded that number of what qualifies as a disproportionately impacted area, that may help more social equity applicants apply because they can find locations to have a business. Going back east to Vermont, while the legislature passed their adult use legislation in 2018, they enacted industry regulations in October of 2020, which includes social equity and promotes small cultivators. Their cannabis control board will include a member with experience in social justice and women and minority-owned business experience. And other priorities include the applicant's ability to foster social justice and equity within the industry and to develop outreach, training, and employment programs. And coming most recently, we have Illinois, which was the first state to enact legislation to allow for and regulate adult use. Again, Maine had they had enacted before, but their regulation bill was vetoed, so they were kind of in limbo for a bit. The statute in Illinois included what most social equity advocates and those in the industry consider to be a very comprehensive social equity inclusion plan. Many angles of social equity are included for assistance to licensing, training, reduction of fees, technical assistance, and they have unique low-interest loans using state funds. And that comes from a $12 million one-time transfer from fees that came from their medical program to start the social equity inclusion plan. And again, that allows the program to continue to investigate ways to improve participation of minorities, women, veterans, people with disabilities, and anyone else who is disadvantaged to join the industry. And Arizona's program directs their Department of Health Services to provide justice reinvestment programs, address public health issues, research and development, development of social equity programs that would promote the ownership and operation of businesses and testing facilities by people from those disproportionately affected communities. Montana's Initiative 190 did not create a specific social equity plan. The tax that is generated from their revenue for the state will provide compensation for the economic and social costs of past and current cannabis cultivation, processing, and use, but directing funds to other efforts as well. It allows their courts to resentence currently serving sentences for acts now permitted or reduce penalties, redesignate or expunge from criminal records completed sentences. And it also funds a veterans program to offset prior uses of unregulated cannabis in ways that may harm vets in things like getting veterans benefits and things like that. And the last example is from New Jersey. Their 2019 legislation allows a social equity license fee on cultivator licenses to fund various programs, including after-school programs for what they call impact zones, a cannabis commission that includes someone from an affected community, and it requires businesses to have a social responsibility or impact plan. So in summary, newly adopted states are learning from the original states' experiences and their lessons learned. Old states are adopting specific social and health equity measures because they're seeing what the newer states are doing. And most programs, unfortunately, are too new to evaluate. And it may be harder to build equity measures into mature markets, such as Colorado and Washington. And it may be easier to build equity into new markets from day one. And again, right now, it's hard to measure success because what is the definition of success right now in this industry is still kind of waiting to be seen. So, Mr. Chair, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions from you in the commission.
Thank you for that thorough presentation. We'd love to get a copy electronically so we can share it with the members. I'll have an easier time reading it than perhaps on the screen. I wanted to ask a question. In the beginning, I think you referred to 19 states that were allowing adult use in addition to medical use. Do we know if those states, if any of them have a agency exclusively for cannabis rather than being under tax or health or ag?
There is, I believe, California they took a bunch of their agencies that were working together and broke it off separately. There are a couple more that have a standalone agency. Sometimes they have it's a standalone, so to speak, but it still might be housed under, say, alcohol or something like that. But it's kind of taking all of the regulations under one roof, so to speak. It's not, some of it's over in rev, some of it's in ag, it's housed under one agency, so to speak, but it might be underneath another shingle somewhere.
I see. And also, you mentioned that in some states that they charge a fee for employees in the industry. And what's the justification for that? Do they make them undergo a background check or something? Is that what that fee is supposed to cover?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's typically required of all employees and owners of businesses in this industry. Background checks, and that can vary on what they're checking for different kinds of previous crimes. If they're a transporter, maybe they're looking at driving records. It can really vary, but those are either 1 or 2 year license times. Typically, they have photo IDs. They're, it's like a badge that's created by the state or the company, but they need permission to create those badges, and they must be worn at all times. Like it's generally pretty strict to create those badges, but they are usually the cost is for processing like a background check or just the cost of creating a badge.
I see. Thank you. Members of the committee, are there questions for Ms. Hansen? Okay. Well, we'll look forward to poring over some of the details in your report. I know that I'm interested in finding out more about these accelerator licenses in Colorado and how Vermont is promoting small cultivators. But we appreciate your research, and we'll look forward to getting a copy of it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We have with us today I believe we have via Zoom Jeremy Price from the Cannabis Control Authority next on the agenda. Is he in the Zoom room? Thanks, Lindley, if you can put him through.
I'm here.
Great. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chair Evans, Vice Chair Herring, and members of the Cannabis Oversight Commission. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. For those who don't know me, my name is Jeremy Priest. By day, I serve as the CCA's Chief Officer for Regulatory, Policy, and External Affairs. I also moonlight currently as the authority's acting head. While I'm participating remotely in this meeting because of a recent positive test for COVID, I'd like to recognize three of my colleagues who are in attendance. First, Manny Laban, who started this week as the CCA's communications lead. Sean Casey, the CCA's regulatory lead. And last but not least, Matt Prentice, the CCA's health policy lead. In fact, Matt will forever enjoy the distinction as being employee number one at the CCA. I want to use this opportunity today to highlight the CCA's priority work. I'd be happy to explore any of these priorities in greater detail and answer any questions you may have. So without further ado, I'm going to launch. We've heard a lot about the medical cannabis program and its prospective transition to the CCA. I would say that no single task currently before the CCA is more important than our assumption of regulatory oversight of medical cannabis. As indicated earlier, the 2021 legislation directed the CCA to take regulatory control of the of the medical cannabis program starting in fiscal year 24. This transition requires our priority attention for at least three reasons. First, it's a large undertaking. The medical cannabis program is growing rapidly. Currently, there are 50,000 patients in the program. And this was a program that was originally conceived as being having maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 patients at any one time. We have reason to believe that once the program fully matures, it could total roughly 200,000 patients. With so many Virginians participating in the program, it's critical we get this right. The regulatory transition must be smooth and complete. Second, assuming oversight of the medical cannabis program is complex. Despite the General Assembly's mandate that the CCA regulate the medical program, and despite strong stakeholder interest across the board in the CCA playing this role, we currently do not possess the statutory authority to do so, as David May indicated earlier. New legislation is required to vest us with that authority. Third, assuming control of the medical cannabis program requires substantial operational changes at the CCA and substantial investments in staff and technology, including costly seed-to-sale software and licensing software. All of this work is currently in process, and we are consulting regularly, as indicated earlier by David, with the Board of Pharmacy about this transition. Finally, I want to note that as part of the transition process, we've begun to assess the current performance of the medical cannabis program with a view to how the CCA might be able to implement changes in the future that would enhance the program's reliability, inclusiveness, competitiveness, and accessibility. Building out the authority's administrative capacity is a major priority too. We are a startup and we have experienced the usual startup growing pains. However, we're making good progress in developing our regulatory and administrative capabilities and will continue to do so throughout fiscal year 23. We've hired 4 additional staff this summer and are on the cusp of hiring a 5th individual to come on board. We have identified numerous other positions that we will be filling this fiscal year as well. We're also investing in technology. We're pursuing seed to sale and licensing software solutions. And we've been working with outside consultants over the last few months to develop a comprehensive website that will be a peerless source of credible information and guidance on cannabis in Virginia. We're excited about how the website and related branding are coming along. The website is scheduled to launch this fall. The General Assembly also directed us to prepare informational resources on a variety of cannabis-related public safety and public health issues. Arguably, the most important of these is a safe driving campaign that will highlight the dangers of drug-impaired driving. States that legalize marijuana often experience a spike in drug-impaired driving. The CCA needs to do everything it can to mitigate that risk, and the Safe Driving campaign is an important component of that effort. We've spoken to many stakeholders about this issue, and we plan further outreach. We've also retained a consultant who currently is conducting a survey of attitudes in the Commonwealth toward marijuana use and driving. The data generated by this survey and the information we collect through outreach will serve as the basis for a public campaign against drug-impaired driving that will be rolled out in various media channels. Depending on how aggressive we want to be in disseminating this message, and I would argue that we should be very aggressive given the stakes, this campaign could prove to be a costly initiative. But it will be money well spent because it will be an investment with life-saving benefits. It's worth noting, too, that we've been coordinating our efforts on safe driving with several interagency partners, like the Virginia Department of Transportation, the Public Safety Secretariat, and the Attorney General's Office. The General Assembly also has required the CCA to develop informational resources and guidance on other specific topics, such as legally compliant and safe home cultivation, the health risks of marijuana consumption, responsible consumption, and ancillary adverse effects. The meaning of this last resource, ancillary effects, is not so obvious and requires further elaboration. The ancillary effects resource addresses all of the ways that a Virginian's rights and privileges could be affected by marijuana use, notwithstanding its legality. For example, even though it is legal within limits to possess and consume marijuana in Virginia, such consumption could still adversely impact a person's rights and privileges regarding employment, housing, education, immigration, and gun ownership, among other things. This is information that Virginians need to have, and we will be putting that information in their hands. We've also embarked on drafting other informational resources. Recently, we completed 6 fact sheets dealing with a diverse range of topics like hemp versus marijuana, what's the difference? Cannabis, mail and travel issues, pesticides, the do's and don'ts of medical cannabis registration, and CBD versus THC, what's the difference? We plan to continue to generate these type of work products, again, as part of our mission to advance Commonwealth's public safety and public health through providing credible information. Once the board of the CCA has reviewed these documents, the documents will all be uploaded on our website, with the exception of the home cultivation resource, which, because it is a formal guidance document, is subject to public comment before finalization. Another priority for the CCA is being responsive to legislative and stakeholder interest in cannabis-related legislation in the next session. Using our knowledge of cannabis developments in other states, as well as Virginia's regulatory state of play, we are regularly answering questions and providing information in response to queries from legislators and stakeholders who are focused on developing legislation for the next session. We expect this area of work to intensify as we get deeper into the fiscal year and the next session draws nearer. I would encourage members of the commission to not be shy and to reach out to us whenever they have questions on cannabis or feel we could assist with the development of policy and legislation. Last but not least is our outreach efforts. These efforts are vital for gaining perspective from Virginians throughout the Commonwealth on their cannabis concerns and issues. And outreach enables us to answer questions, provide information, and demystify the topic of cannabis regulation. We are always available to speak to any group or individual with an interest in cannabis policy and regulation. In late June, CCA staff and a board member had a successful 4-day listen and learn tour of Southwest Virginia. On that trip, we met with a broad spectrum of stakeholders on a variety of topics, including the operation of the medical cannabis program. This fall and winter, we plan to step up our formal outreach efforts, holding a series of town halls throughout the Commonwealth. That completes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions any of you may have.
Thank you. Yeah, we do have some members with questions. I'm going to start, though, and just ask, how many staff do you think you'll have at the end of this fiscal year? Or might you have?
Yeah, well, we have targeted hiring staff that would bring us to at the end of the fiscal year to in the neighborhood of 36 folks.
And in terms of the safe driving campaign, when is that slated to actually begin? That the public would see the public service announcements or whatever the campaign results in?
At the beginning of next year.
Okay, and are you working with AAA on that? Are they involved as a stakeholder? Great.
Yes, yeah, they were one of the first stakeholders we touched base with.
Okay, Delegate Adams has a question.
Good morning still. I appreciate the information. I wanted to specifically ask some questions related to your public safety bullet points. I think they're all very important data points. I'm just wondering, what does the data show now relative to impaired driving in the state? And I'm asking that question because we can only really know the impact of cannabis on impaired driving if we know what to compare it to. And then secondarily, do we collect data on the ancillary effects of other intoxicants? Again, data is only as good as what you're comparing it to. And so I just wanted to make sure that we had something to relate it to once we get that information.
Right. You raise a very good point. That's a very good question. My understanding is right now, the data on cannabis impaired driving is, how shall I put it, underdeveloped and not regular. And that's something that we need to address because as you say, if we want to measure the impact of our efforts to mitigate, to reduce drug impaired driving, we need to have a base. We need to have a commonly understood database. And so we have begun to work with others in public safety to see if we can identify ways to have data that will serve as the basis for measuring future progress on reducing impaired driving.
Is that it on your end, Delegate
I
Adams?
guess, and to add to that, I hope that what will be included are, many people are on medications that impair their judgment or abilities, and also, I'm sure at some point we collect drunk or impaired driving related to alcohol. So I just, that is also, I think, really critical as part of that baseline, so that we know what the variation accounts for.
Agreed.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Herring, and then we're going to return to Delegate Ranson afterwards.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Priest, and thank you for all of everybody and those in here, all your hard work. And I very much appreciate it. And thank you for your open door policy and asking us to come to you with questions. I appreciate that. My question is regarding the four staff members who have been hired and you're hiring a fifth. If you could give us a little bit more information about their job descriptions, what they are doing.
Yeah, sure. We have folks with public health backgrounds, two staff with public health backgrounds. We have a communications professional. We have a regulatory attorney who, before joining us, was the senior assistant attorney general for cannabis in Colorado. So she comes to us with a wealth of experience from a state that has a significant track record in cannabis regulation and policy. Right now, we have our formal job descriptions, which are focused on developing a lot of the resources that I mentioned in my presentation. But we're also, because we're leanly staffed right now, we're all filling all the gaps that arise. We're on the cusp of hiring a chief administrative officer, which will be great because then those of us who maybe aren't as expert in that as we are in other things like law, policy, and public health, we can get out of the HR, procurement, and budget and finance areas. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Ranson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is probably going to piggyback off of Delegate Adams, and it's related to the research that's being done on safe driving, but also how you are researching the health risk of cannabis use and how it will, I think one of your bullet points, impact a person's employment and a person's education, whether it's short-term use or long-term use, and how you're going to research that and then get that information out into the public and how quickly you'll get that out there.
It's a good question. Our research on employment and on education, those kinds of ancillary adverse effects that I mentioned, that research is to make sure that Virginians are informed so that they know that despite the fact that Virginia has legalized marijuana and it's now legal within limits to consume it, that doesn't mean they can't be fired from their job for having tested positive or refusing to test, to take a drug test, or not actually have access to employment because they refused to take a drug test or have failed a drug test. Same with things like housing and educational benefits, which are provided by the federal government. I think people, there is definitely a subgroup of people who are laboring under the impression that they are in the clear now that Virginia has legalized marijuana and they can consume it without consequences. And we just want to make them aware of these ancillary consequences. So that's the focus of the research. These resources are completed. They're awaiting board review. We will post them on this new website that we're currently developing that will go live this fall.
Thank you, Delegate Ransom. Thank you, Mr. Price. I want to thank everyone who's working for the CCA, getting things stood up and advancing your agency's mission. Appreciate. I know we haven't given you perhaps all the specificity that you might like for a start, but it's important work. We have another presentation with Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry Parker Slaybaugh and David McGreevy, Deputy. Yes, Delegate Adams. Yeah, Delegate Adams, why don't you go ahead?
And I'm hoping this doesn't get me in trouble, but before we move on to hemp, I just want to, we've had, this is our first meeting this year and multiple meetings, and I think I've never had a chance to talk to anybody from the Cannabis Control Authority, so that was great to be here for that. I just think something that I hope that we all keep in mind is that cannabis and the field of cannabis and cannabis medicine and adult use cannabis is changing so rapidly. And we have the benefit of many states that have done this before us, but we don't have to do it exactly the same.
Right.
And some of the things that I'm hearing, even in the NCLS presentation, just kind of hit me in a way that I hope that we're thinking about it in a very broad sense. For example, when they talk about health equity, it really is sort of, I think it's kind of a misnomer. What they're really talking about is how do we use funds for substance abuse. And I don't think that that's really a health equity issue around cannabis. When we talk about social equity, we're looking at states that are primarily started out in mostly the Midwest and the West. I've lived in many of those states, and they're primarily white. And so what we're really talking about when we talk about social equity in many of these states, it's a white population with a Hispanic or Asian population. And what we have unique in Virginia is we're the first southern state that has a large, a significant black population, more than 20% as compared to like a state that has 1.5% or a state that has 8%. And so we just have this opportunity to do things a little differently, to build on, ideas that have come from other states' experiences, but we don't have to do them exactly the same. And I hope that we kind of keep that conceptual framework broad. And also, the other thing that I think it's very important that we talk about intoxication and impairment and public safety. These are all important. This is a drug. And at the same time, much of the history of what we think about this drug is completely wrong. And as somebody who practices in the medical cannabis field every day and is constantly researching it, I can tell you that even though I don't have the power to change Schedule I DEA, it absolutely is a medication that has significant value and changes the quality of people's life and people's health, and is safer than many things that aren't even scheduled, alcohol being one of them. Alcohol is incredibly intoxicating. We have a framework for that, and we can take out information so that we have a framework for how to measure intoxication and those types of things. But I think we have an opportunity here to do a very unique, framework for how to implement both the structure of sales and processing, as well as use and monitoring that use and the safety of the public at large. So I just kind of felt like I needed to say all that.
Thank you. Thanks. Good points. They're appreciated.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator McClellan.
And I guess to that end, I'll remind everybody that before we ever passed marijuana legalization legislation, we passed a bill asking JLARC to study it and look at what other states did and make recommendations on how we can legalize marijuana with some key goals in mind that included how do we maintain and expand our existing medical marijuana program? How do we install public safety protections to protect minors and identify and prosecute those who sell marijuana without legal authority? Create strong testing and labeling, provide equity and economic opportunity for every community, especially those disproportionately impacted by prohibition drug policies, and ensure racial equitable programs and policies exist. So we've already said and had JLARC study and then revisit, this is the framework we want to follow. And so as we go forward, we need to make sure, absent direction from the General Assembly otherwise, this is the framework we intend to follow. And so I want to remind everybody, because it was the first JLARC study I ever got done in 14 years, let's not ignore it.
Okay. Senator McClellan, do you want to hear from JLARC again, or you just want us to keep in mind the results of their past visits with us?
Well, I don't know that we need to hear from them again. We've already heard from NCSL what other states are doing, and we haven't done anything since JLARC's last study. So I just want us to make sure not only are we keeping in mind their recommendations, but the framework we ask them to build those recommendations around.
Thank you. Okay. Unless there's, we'll come back, we'll have a chance for further discussion, a more general discussion, but I want to move to our next presentation from Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry Parker Slaybaugh and David McGreevy, Deputy Director of the Division of Animal and Food Industry Services at VDAX. They have a joint presentation with an update on the task force to analyze industrial hemp extracts and other substances containing tetrahydrocannabinol intended for human consumption, and the recent enforcement of the food and drink law related to industrial hemp extracts intended for human consumption. So, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, members of the commission. Thank you all for having us this morning. My name is Parker Slaybaugh. I'm Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry for Governor Glenn Youngkin. I have the honor to serve under Secretary Matthew Lohr in this position. I appreciate the invitation to come this morning. Mr. Chair, I appreciate working with your office to get this scheduled this morning. We're very happy to be here. We want to be respectful of the commission's time and kind of break down our presentation into two parts. I'm actually going to step aside and turn it over to VDAX first, and then I'll come back and clean up to give kind of a very brief, very high-level overview of the work of the hemp task force that we've been undertaking this summer, and kind of let you know where our next steps are. This morning, before I do let VDAX come up here, I do also want to recognize two other members of VDAX who are here with us, who have been instrumental in this process that we've been undertaking since the new budget language came out earlier this year, and are happy to answer any questions that you may have later on. Aaron Williams and Kevin Smith are sitting at the back of the room. I know many of you in your offices have probably worked with them or communicated with them in the past, so I appreciate all their work. But for now, to kind of give an update on the food and drink law related to industrial hemp extracts and where VDAX has kind of been over the past 2 months since the budget language has come out from the General Assembly and was signed by Governor Youngkin, I'll turn it over to David McGreevy.
Good afternoon, committee members. As discussed, I will very briefly give you an overview of the Virginia Department of Agricultural's food safety program and then explain our recent hemp activities. The VDAX food safety program's mission is to ensure that foods are processed, manufactured, and stored and sold in Virginia in a safe and wholesome and properly labeled manner. We protect consumers and also promote Virginia businesses. VDAX regulates and inspects food manufacturers, food distributors, and any retail establishments where foods are sold. We spend a lot of time in the grocery stores that we shop at, and also working with manufacturers that sell nationally and even internationally. The program currently has 28 inspectors that cover approximately 13,000 food establishments across the Commonwealth. Our laws were amended in 2020 to include industrial hemp extracts intended for human consumption. It allows an industrial hemp extract to be regulated as a food product and provides for a maximum THC content of 0.3%. The law also states that the extract or food containing industrial hemp extract must be approved by VDAX. Under this law, VDAX has been approving manufacturers to sell industrial hemp extracts. Regulations were adopted this year that included testing and labeling requirements. Since the agency has been involved in this arena over the past several years, hemp products have significantly changed. There are now many retailers offering products for sale that are intended for human consumption that contain cannabinoids. These products often contain high levels of Delta-8 or other cannabinoids. These products can be intoxicating and do not meet the legal definition of an industrial hemp extract. Since they are not extracts, they cannot be approved for manufacture or sale by VDAX and are in violation of the law. Hemp products are also being marketed in a way that may appeal to children with packaging and labeling that mimics candy. The recent budget included additional funding for hemp enforcement activities at the agency. On June 30th, VDAX informed Virginia food manufacturers and retail establishments that products intended for human consumption containing cannabinoids may be considered adulterated if such products contain an ingredient that is not an approved food pursuant to our laws or not manufactured in a facility that is under inspection or under VDEX inspection or inspection by an approved regulatory authority in another state. Our staff has been in the field inspecting manufacturers, distribution, and retail establishments in order to determine whether the cannabinoid products being sold are approved industrial hemp extracts. When an unlawful products are found, the firm is requested to remove them from sale and cease any future sales of that product. The firm owners are educated to help them understand why the products they are being sold or manufactured are in violation of current law, and why those products should not be manufactured or sold in the future. When necessary, the regulatory enforcement process is initiated to ensure continued compliance. The budget bill also included additional labeling requirements for industrial hemp extracts. The labeling must state that the extract or food containing THC contains THC and may not be sold to any person under the age of 21. The label must list all ingredients. The label must include the amount of extract or the food that constitutes a single serving. The label must contain the total percentage in milligrams of THC. And we are currently working with manufacturers and retailers to inform them of this new requirement and get them into compliance.
Can I ask, before you move on, what the penalty is for non-compliance after someone, I assume you give them, I don't know if you give them a warning first, or what the penalty is for a violator?
Yes, sir. We have a standard regulatory framework that we work with all of our establishments on, regardless of what the type of violation is, and this would be that same type of violation. So we go through various warnings, which include follow-up letters, repeat visits, and then could end up in hearings, with potentially their permits being withdrawn or a case being taken to court.
Thank you. Delegate Adams?
Hi, thanks. I didn't notice on your list of synthetics, I mean, and I'm sure you've seen in the gas stations and every other store, there's also pretty high doses of Delta-9 THC, which is what we consider adult use cannabis. So is that included in what you're enforcing? That's one of my first questions. And the second question I have is just, to what degree do you anticipate being effective if you have, I think you said 13,000 establishments. I don't know if that includes gas stations, but you have 28, so that's like close to 500 apiece. I mean, how will you wrap your arms around this?
Yes, it is a large project, and we appreciate the additional resources to work on it. We're focusing our enforcement efforts on, some of the high traffic areas. We're also focusing our efforts on the source of it, coming from manufacturers and distributors, and we'll just kind of, what do they say, eat the elephant one bite at a time.
And will you be addressing the Delta-9 THC that's in these hemp products as well?
Yeah, so of course hemp products contain a lot of cannabinoids, including Delta-9, and there can be some at a very low level that are legal. But if it goes above the 0.3%, then that is no longer a hemp product. And
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Delegate.
So the problem with that framework is that there are two different measurements. So what this end product is sold at is in milligrams. The only percentage comes when it's a smokable product. So when it's in an edible product or consumable product that is oral, it's going to be in milligrams. So when you find that Delta-9 THC hemp product that's in the gas station, you'll have 100 milligrams of THC in a 10 milligram per unit dose. So it's not. So it doesn't matter if it's being derived from 0.3% hemp, because at the end of the day, it becomes concentrated into a product that's ultimately made into a milligram product that's sold. And that's the issue. So whether it's a synthetic variant or the Delta-9, these milligrams become significant in any kind of volume. So it really does matter, and you're not going to find a product that says, here's your candies that are 0.3% without having, unless you have the milligrams. The milligrams are actually on there. So that's my question is, are you going to include that in your enforcement?
So milligrams are not a part of our legal framework right now, and so we're working with the laws that we have.
Okay. I'm sorry, why don't we continue the presentation?
And I think that's a great segue. Part of what the hemp task force has been tasked with working on since the budget was approved is looking at other areas where the law may not be fully clear as to what is legal, what can be enforced, what VDACs can enforce, what law enforcement can enforce. And that's certainly when we talk about the legal framework, that's a very great point that I think has come up numerous times at the task force meetings, which would likely require further legislation from this body, from the General Assembly, at some point to make sure that when our VDACs inspectors go into a facility and find something that is illegal, that they do have the authority and the ability to pull that off the shelves.
Mr. Chair, can I ask you a question?
Delegate Adams.
So what would you like the legislation to say? Because this year, we had that opportunity to do exactly that. And SB 591, it was a very good bill that limited exactly this. And so how would you like that communicated so that it would be helpful? Because I don't know how it could be better communicated, and obviously we didn't do a good job because it didn't pass. So what would we do differently?
Well, I have to say, what I would like the legislation to say is far above my pay grade. But, I think there was several attempts this year, one through the bill that came out, I think it was the Senator Hanger bill that started as everybody called it the Shapes and Gummies bill, and then was amended through the process, and the governor sent back other amendments. So I think, kind of where we are at this point is having this task force to look at what we do need to do to go forward. And I think part of what this task force, and kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself, looks forward to doing is not wanting to preempt the work of the task force, which is still ongoing, but look at these problems that we have in the code and look at where, at the end of the day, this task force and this entire legislative discussion is about keeping people safe and making sure that products that could be harmful aren't allowed to remain on the shelves. And so I think what the task force, our office, VDACS, looks forward to doing is taking that report when it comes to you all by November 15th and seeing how we can work together from the administration level, from the agency level, and then certainly from the General Assembly perspective to put legislation forward that can pass and could have a real impact in making sure that our community is safe. So just a quick overview of the task force. The task force has about 12 different state sectors of government participating in it. Ourselves with the Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, also working in conjunction with the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, as well as the Secretary of Health and Human Resources. And I put this chart on the screen that you can kind of see. It includes folks from VDACS, the OAG's office, Department of Health, Board of Pharmacy. You can read all the ones that are involved, but this really goes to show you the number of different agencies that are kind of involved in this space in one aspect or another. Certainly Virginia State Police from the criminal aspect, Commonwealth Attorney Services Council from once something does reach a prosecution standpoint. And this is a topic that the task force has focused a lot of time and energy on is sometimes the complexity of dealing with 12 different state sectors of government and who has authority over where. And exactly what authority that they do have. So I did want to make sure you knew who all was participating on the task force. The task force so far has had 2 meetings. Our first one was July 7th, 2022, earlier this summer. During that task force meeting, we had 3 presentations. The first was from the Virginia Department of Forensic Science, where they really went into great detail about the different types of THC, the different legal implications, the different testing capabilities that they have, the difference between the isonomers, between Delta 9, Delta 8, Delta 10. Following that, we had a similar presentation from what you just heard from David McGreevy. This one was given by Ryan Davis at VDACS, talking about the food safety program at VDACS and kind of the increased enforcement in light of the budget language that came from the General Assembly. After that, we had a presentation also from VDACS, kind of similar to the NCSL one that you had just a little bit ago, but this presentation focused more specifically on hemp products and what other states are doing to regulate those. That took up about the first 90 minutes. I'm happy to say that following that, we had about 90 minutes of public comment where folks were able to come and participate virtually and in person. I think everybody who showed up or who signed up to speak was able to speak. Various industry stakeholders were there to have their voices heard. We also, following that, collected 30 days worth of public comment. It actually turned out to be more than 30 days because once we had scheduled the August 9th meeting, we wanted to make sure that folks had the ability. We did not collect public comment once again at that August 9th meeting, but we did want to make sure stakeholders had the ability to chime in or to comment on any of the further discussion that happened at that August 9th meeting. I'll also mention that Aaron Williams from VDAX, who is also a member of the task force, held, I believe, 6 separate listening sessions between that July and August meeting to where industry stakeholders could once again hop on virtually, have kind of a little bit more detailed interaction with VDAX, kind of make sure that the topics that they discussed during their public comments and also the topics that had been discussed during the first meeting, they had a chance to ask further questions. She came back at the next meeting on August 9th and gave a report on those listening sessions. Also at that August 9th meeting, we heard about recent emergency calls related to cannabinoid consumption from the UVA Health Center, Blue Ridge Poison Control Center. I think for many on the task force, that was eye-opening to see the increased spike in poison control related calls that have happened over the past several years as these different hemp-related products have increased in prevalence across the Commonwealth. And just following that presentation, we received an email the next day from the presenter at the UVA Health System, Blue Ridge Poison Control Center, notifying us to maybe one of the next most egregious incidents that happened just last month, earlier in August, and where a grandmother went into a convenience store and bought what she fully believed was just a popular candy that her 5-year-old grandchild enjoyed, and completely innocently gave it to the grandchild, and she also consumed part of it. Within a couple of hours, they were both in the emergency room. Come to find out that that popular candy that looked just like a popular candy that you could go find today had 500 milligrams of THC in it, and put the 5-year-old daughter in, or the 5-year-old grandchild in an intensive care unit. I think the latest report that we've received is they are both okay, but I did want to read one line from his email that we shared with the task force following that. Again, this is from the UVA Health System, and in the message to the task force, he said, the pediatric THC exposure numbers are escalating, and we will have a death from one of these exposures in the future if we cannot stop these types of sales. We have worked hard at the Poison Control Center to make our community safe for our state's children. I have never seen anything like this before in my 30-year career. I think that really underscores kind of the importance of the topic that the task force is working on, certainly with the budget language and the enforcement mechanisms that it gave to VDAX and to the OAG's office. Really targeting kind of these copycat items is making a difference. And certainly can't speak for the OAG's office, but I think everybody understands just how important it is to keep the foot on the gas when it comes to targeting these products and further legislation to make sure that the public is educated about what is legal and what is illegal. So quickly to wrap up, we also had a quick presentation from the U.S. Hemp Roundtable at that August 9th meeting. They are the leading hemp industry advocates nationwide, and kind of have a very measured approach to how they think these products should be regulated and all. They did kind of say at that meeting, one quick pull quote that I wanted to pull for you is that the U.S. Hemp Roundtable is also deeply troubled about the increasing proliferation of products that are sold under the guise of the hemp name, but are marketed for their intoxicating effects. And one of the things that they really stressed is hemp is not marijuana. And in marijuana, if it's meant to be an intoxicating component, hemp, there are a number of products that are out there that are using the good name of hemp that do produce an intoxicating quality. And so very important to kind of keep those two discussions about marijuana and hemp separate. We did finish that meeting with another presentation, part 2 of what other states are doing to regulate these products. Where did we come up with those states? During the 90 minutes of public comment in the listening sessions, a number of stakeholders brought up, hey, why didn't you look at this state? So we wanted to make sure that members of the public wanted to make sure that the General Assembly knows that those public comments are being taken to heart and are being looked at and reviewed by the task force. So we came back with kind of a part 2 of what those states are also doing. Here's some of just the real quick topics of discussion that we've been going over. Enforcement, who is responsible and where. We've talked about that a little bit. We've talked about the gray areas in the code. Pop-up events, vape shops are 2 that kind of we hear a lot about currently. VDAX isn't able to kind of have any sort of regulatory oversight. And I think, Delegate Adams, you mentioned kind of the vape shops a little bit. And also pop-up events. If there is a pop-up event that is selling some sort of dangerous product, sometimes the regulatory process that VDAX is forced to operate within doesn't have the ability to shut those down or to make sure that the illegal products aren't being sold by the time the event's over and gone. Availability to minors, the public safety threat, and then potential legislation. Next steps, we do have one further meeting this fall. We are going to get that report to the General Assembly by November 15th, and from there, look forward to working with all of you on different legislative proposals going forward for the 2024 General Assembly session.
Thank you. I think it's Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess as a follow-up, and I appreciate the work that's been done on the safety, because I think all the members of the General Assembly have agreed and been pushing for it, and I appreciate the team's work on the product safety line. Inevitably, we have a context where we have legalized personal consumption, home grow. You have basically a market responding to condition, right, through hemp products and other things. I mean, ultimately, the team has got to see through the lens that ultimately access to retail sales, providing a very clear definition of what's within the VDAX parameters and what's in the Cannabis Authority is ultimately the answer. That way you can guarantee defined products that are safe for consumers and you know the rules of the road.
Sure.
I mean, ultimately, hopefully my members in the House sort of hear the conversation that's happening, because the ultimate context that we're left with is an illicit market that's going to continue to thrive unless something is done to legalize the retail components that are on the table. I mean, this is what we're dealing with and what the presentation just happened, which is the market forces are entering a vacuum. And these pop-ups, you're never going to chase down all the pop-ups that are happening. There's just an article last week on pop-ups in Virginia. There's a great article in the Washington Post as well, 3-page spread on California and different pressures in terms of taxation rate, market, and the rest of it. I mean, Virginia's in this weird place now because of non-reenactment, that you can have 100 pounds of marijuana at home, you can have your own consumption, but if you don't have a green thumb, you can't have access. Well, guess what? The market is determining different relief valves for that until we legislate and provide a safe market that's accessible to Virginians.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Leftwich?
Just want to know whether or not you'd had a chance to, or anyone in your organization had a chance to confer with Dr. Michelle Peace with VCU. She has done a number of studies on the products that are out there now. In addition to the concentration of THC, her company, which obtained a grant to do studies, has found that a lot of these products have dangerous metals in them as well. So there's a number of health risks in this illicit market. And if you haven't had a chance to confer with her, I would strongly encourage you to speak with her about some of the health risks that these products are posing to our citizens and constituents.
I know our office back, I believe, during the General Assembly session, had a chance to meet with Dr. Pace. And I believe, looking at Aaron, I think she participated at one of the listening sessions potentially, maybe, I'm not sure. But we have had some communications with her. And I think the point that you raise is there is this ongoing discussion about what is safe limits of anything, of THC, of different types of other ingredients. And I think the challenge has been so far is either a blanket statement that says anything with this product is just illegal, or if you look at from the perspective of where the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, I think, has been, is anything that's intoxicating should be illegal, and anything that's not intoxicating should be legal. What is that number, though? And that's where it's been really tough to kind of put your finger on, okay, 0.3%, milligrams, what have you, as kind of the defining factor. And certainly any studies that are being done to kind of help accomplish that number are certainly important to this conversation.
Follow up, Mr. Chair? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, so aside from the debate of what's intoxicating, what's not intoxicating, what's the appropriate level, aside from all that, we don't allow metals in our vegetables, you know? And there are ingredients that's going into these things because of the way that's being manufactured, which is not regulated, that's getting into our food system or getting into our bodies. And you know, beyond 8-year-olds getting poisoned by gummies, you know, we have adults being poisoned by metals and other things that shouldn't be in there, period, whether we, you know, even if we do, you know, create a market to sell it.
And I think you're exactly right, and I think even further to that point, it's metals, it's pesticides, it's, you know, other types of potentially harmful ingredients.
Delegate Adams?
Yeah, I appreciate Delegate Leftwich bringing that up. I mean, there's never been a documented case of anyone dying from THC, so let's be clear, that's not why people are having the trouble. Yes, it causes intoxication. It can cause a whole lot of symptoms that are horrible and uncomfortable. The issue in an unregulated product is that not only are there metals, but in order to create these synthetic products, they are highly toxic, many times carcinogenic acids used to create these products. So it is a complicated situation that I think is sort of the train has left the station. And it's super concerning that we have allowed us to be in this situation. And so I hope that the task force has an ability to rein this in, but I think it's a much more complicated problem than just, the fact that there is THC in a product. And I think that needs to be part of the conversation.
Sure, absolutely.
Any further questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Now, we've completed the presentation part of our agenda, but I wanted to open it up to discussion, particularly on priority topics for future meetings. One thing that I'm curious is, would people like to hear from the Board of Pharmacy at all, or is that more ancillary to what you would like to talk about? Any other topics or speakers you all would like to have, and especially the new members of the committee? I know I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there's anything, we've had a number of meetings over the past year or so, or year or two. But if there's something that you'd like us to address or to have someone brought in expertise, happy to do that. Delegate Leftwich.
So I was telling my seatmate here that this is my first foray into this, on this commission. Anything you can tell me would be helpful. So if other members want to hear from the Board of Pharmacy, I'm all for it. But I don't think you can bring a speaker in here that wouldn't be instructive to me.
Okay.
And serving on this board.
Yeah, because I think I'd like to hear from the Board of Pharmacy. It may not need to be a long discussion, but I want to hear about how they're doing and how we can, if we decide to transfer, how we're going to go ahead with that, and the way their employees are allocated relating to cannabis. Yes, Delegate Ransom.
Mr. Chairman, and I don't want anyone to fall out of their chair or the audience to awe or anything, but you all may have already talked about this, but the regulatory framework or inspections or enforcement, maybe I would need to learn a little more about that. Coming from me, I know everyone's like, what?
I think you're right. I think it's great.
But I've heard about licensing, but who is going to enforce that? I'd like to know a little more about that.
Okay.
The regulatory framework.
Making a note. Okay. Any others? Unless there are other comments from members of the commission, we're going to take some public comment for up to no more than 3 minutes per speaker. Are there members of the audience in person who would like to address the commission today? Why don't you come forward, sir, and introduce yourself, and if you can, keep your comments to just under 3 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm what's left of Marty Jewell, and my senator's over there. She's keeping a close eye on me. I chair the Cannabis Equity Coalition of Virginia. We've got reach throughout the Commonwealth, and I'm vice president of the Richmond Crusade for Voters. We support cannabis legalization, but we primarily are focused on the equity component that almost got killed last year. We urge you to be inclusive and be broad about it. The Pew Research Center did a study around 2012 after the economic crash in 08 and 09. Black businesses lost 45% of our black businesses, 50% of our collective wealth in the U.S., and we're the last ethnic group to recover. That equity commission fund is going to be hugely important for us. In order to see if we can recover, our nonprofits desperately need these funds. We just had a press conference yesterday about our poor educational scores, test scores, just yesterday. Well, schools can't fix that by themselves. We've got nonprofits that do terrific work, but they need funding. We've got 132 municipalities in Virginia. And I challenge anybody to show me one that includes black folk in the economic mainstream of that municipality. It's the economy, stupid. And sadly, our black leaders have failed us in that regard in terms of leadership and trying to find ways to fix this. And so we need those funds. You've got the tobacco settlement fund. You guys drew the boundaries for where those dollars would be made available. All in the tobacco belt, Southside Virginia. Well, those farmers deserve support. They've been injured. But my God, we've had the manufacturing plants in Richmond and in Petersburg. They were shut down, jobs lost, but they're not included in any of that equity. And so we need help. Thank you a lot.
Thank you for being here today. Are there others in the room who'd like to come forward? Okay, is there anyone waiting in the Zoom room? I don't know if that's, okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. We have a lot more to discuss and to accomplish before the next legislative session, and we'll be in touch about our next meeting date. Thank you, members of the committee. The committee will rise.